Three, two, one. Ready?
Them is the big eyes. There are big eyes there. 3, 2, 1, go.
All right, everyone. Welcome to Rise and Thrive. We're here once again doing our SIPSANG segments. We are going to recap what we talked about last night in SIPSANG. As you can see, we did mind. It's right behind Tim there. Want to point at it, Tim? There it is, if you couldn't see it. So we did mind. Why did you choose mind, Tim?
Well, mind, the reason why I wanted to bring up mind was to take a whack at exploring quite a deep topic that's difficult to understand and wrap your head around. And more importantly, wrap your consciousness around, right? And more importantly, wrap your mind and your thoughts and your consciousness around what mind might actually be. So this last night's talk was inspired by the work of a gentleman named Sid Banks, who I got introduced through a fellow who I've never met, but who I consider a mentor because of his material. His name is Michael Neal, and he's the founder of something called Super Coach, and so he does really interesting things. But he draws from this guy named Sid Banks, who is this Scottish guy who's a welder of all things, and not in coaching, not in any kind of personal development, just a guy who is like stuck, right? And it kind of reminds me of the same story of Lester Levinson and the release technique, and lots of stories like this where someone was just stuck and they just kind of wiggled through things and ultimately came to some really powerful understandings of how things are. And he came up with something called the 3 principles. And the 3 principles are mind, consciousness, and thought. And so I wanted to open up this idea to see if we could start basically sparring, if you will, to have some understanding and some, to grok, as you know, if anybody's read A Stranger in a Strange Land, you'll understand what the word grok kind of means. It means something to understand, and something so thoroughly it's as if you drank it and it became part of you, kind of thing. You're not separate from that information. And so mind is ultimately comes from the Buddhist tradition of big mind versus small mind. And mind is like the power that allows everything to be, right? It's the source of all creation, if you want to call it a source. But it's like the transmitting utility of how anything can be created, no matter if it's a rock or the earth or my hand or this person or that bug or whatever it is. A grape making wine. Anyways, so we started having, I wanted to open up this discussion around, okay, understanding that, can we wrap our idea around what mind is because it's part of it gets limited and difficult because of the limitations of language, right? So we're trying to take these really quantum ideas and wrap language around them. And when we do that, some of the meaning has to get, or even a lot of the meaning has to get diminished, because how do you explain all that is with words, right? But in order to have the conversation and open up conversations that really cause our own individual mind, so what Sid Banks would probably call our consciousness, right? Not to be confused with our thoughts, but our consciousness is our perceptions and awarenesses of things, right? Our consciousness is how we can explore and begin to experience more of what mind might be, which then in turn affects what our thoughts. So the more you can expand your consciousness to tap into mind, the more that your thoughts change, right? Mm-hmm. So most of the world is looking on a what to do basis, right? What do I do? What's the formula? What's the recipe, right? So we work with affirmations and different tips and techniques and tactics and talents and all these different things to kind of manage or cope with the parts of our personality that we don't like or we struggle with, right? So that's kind of trying to adjust things at the measure of thought, if you will. And that has some success, but nothing that I have experienced, like I did, Sid Banks's work is quite new to me actually, but it's very similar to some of the other stuff that I've exposed that actually completely blew my brain apart, right? And allowed me to see things that weren't even there before, right? So that's that, meaning my consciousness was able to expand. And I'm not saying I'm done, because I'm sure shit not. I got lots to go. I got lots to go. And in fact, you'll never be done in a sense, because how can you be done the infinite?
Mm-hmm.
Right? But the more that we can ask ourselves the question instead of what to do. I like how Michael Neal puts it. He goes like, how does it work? So instead of what to do about what you're struggling with, if you glean this understanding and expand this understanding about how these three principles work, for instance, how it works, well, then your struggles begin to look different. So from a quantum perspective, you can't pour consciousness on something without changing it, right? You can't observe. They call it being the observer, and you can't observe something without changing it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a big, huge conversation that's very challenging to put words around, but I think it's an important thing to try to put words around, at least in our Western culture.
Yeah. And well, last night I said, my brain is melting.
Yeah.
And another member in the group concurred, and it's like, try to explain this. And it's like, and
Yeah.
it's funny because these are three concepts or three things or whatever they are that I've been exploring for many years. And I've never taken the time to consider, well, what's the difference between the three?
Yes.
Or how do they interrelate? And it's like, why wouldn't, it's just it's really fascinating to me that these simple questions we tend not to ask for some reason. Right?
Absolutely.
So it's
Right.
What is mind? It's like, well, you think
Yeah.
but then try to explain it.
It's all held in the mind, but what mind, and what's allowing it, whatever it is, to be held in what you're calling mind.
Well, and then one of our members, she was trying to explain the difference between the three, which you tasked us to do.
Yes.
And I felt like I could understand what she was trying to say, but I couldn't understand her words. And I couldn't help her,
No.
So it was really fascinating that we're sharing this similarity without being able to verbalize it.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Because if we were doing this in person, like if it was in a workshop or something like this, one of the most powerful experiences I've ever incurred when I was a participant in live stuff is when someone would, the facilitator would say, hey, okay, so blah, 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 here's a piece of something to chew on. Now turn to the person next to you and explain it. Because, we have lots of people, oh, mm-hmm, yeah, oh, very interesting. Oh, oh, ah, mm-hmm. 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 And you think you get it. Oh yeah, I get it. I'm like, you don't got it. Try to explain it.
Yeah.
And the member that you're referencing, they knew it. They knew that the words weren't matching what the thoughts were,
Mm-hmm.
how the understandings were. And that's okay. Like, there is no right or wrong way to do this. It's about making that effort. And, I really think it's important to, like you said, several SIPSANGs ago, like to offer that opportunity to put words around the thoughts that I'm having, especially when your thoughts are changing. Because what you mentioned last night was that, you haven't had your brain feel like this since you kind of awoke up to the whole idea of quantum physics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And something else that's interesting that I didn't mention last night is that the effect of the wine on me was much different.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So
here to share more?
Yeah. So, typically if I drink wine, I feel buzzed or on the way to being drunk, right? Depending how much is drank.
Yeah.
But last night I got to bed and I was like, I don't feel the wine at all.
Yeah.
At all.
And
I'm like, I drank as much as I typically would, maybe 2-3 glasses on a SIPSANG night.
Yep.
And I typically feel it. But last night it was just like nothing.
Yeah.
It was a slight, I want to say kind of like high.
Yeah.
Like just a slight, like, I don't know how to explain it other than that.
And honestly, I believe that's mind at play, or consciousness at play, or the dance between mind and consciousness at play. Because something really interesting that I've been exploring, as you know, and quite frankly, is the reason why SIPSANG, kind of this little petri dish that we call SIPSANG, exists, is like when the consciousness gets really high around something, how we seem to operate changes. Even like you're saying, how little you were affected by the substance, because the consciousness that we were bringing, the awareness that we were bringing to that conversation, it was challenging, and it was sometimes kind of frustrating even. But you're a living example of your experience of what you're describing. I think is perfectly is a perfect demonstration of what's possible. So is it the substance, or is it the
consciousness?
Consciousness around the consumption of the substance?
I like that you put it that way, because I've noticed that if I'm bored somewhere, say I go to a party, or I'm somewhere that I'm not enjoying the people or the conversation.
Yeah.
It's really easy to get drunk really quickly. Right?
Yeah.
And I've been playing with this for many years, and this last night was very obvious. Like, okay, we're going into like my brain, I said, is melting. It feels like it is. Anyhow, I'm repeating
Beautiful.
myself, but yeah.
Totally. I'm so glad you shared that. That's cool. Thanks.
When it's not just wine that happens with either.
No.
Mm-hmm.
Just red wine has a certain, there's a certain purity around it that just, it allows truth to show up in it. And where other alcohols, there's alcohol in all alcohols, obviously, to state the redundant, right? The obvious. But I believe, and I've done some exploration around this with different people, that like hard liquors, for instance, they have their spirits. Like, they're called spirits. Why are they called spirits? And my belief is that they have plant medicine, and that those plants bring their own essence, right? Which gets, if you have a homeopathic solution, right, or a tincture or something like that, they like, yeah, you can do it with glycerin, but more normally it's in alcohol, because it's so stable and will hold that information, right? It'll keep it from deteriorating and degrading. And so, but with wine, there's a reason why they call it truth serum, right?
Mm-hmm. Cool.
But,
I like it. Okay, yeah. So last night we decided that we should somewhat continue this next week.
Yes.
Sleep on it, so to speak.
Yes.
We'll sleep on it 6 nights and then come back to it. On the 7th night, we will understand.
Absolutely. We'll do
so next week we're going
to just do thinking.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to enter this from the other end, right? Not thought, but thinking.
Okay. I like it. So if anybody wants to join us, please do. Reach out to Tim at sipsang.com. Request an invite. He'll be nice to you, hopefully, maybe. I guess we'll find out. And you can also get a PDF download there of the 85 signs you're a SIPSanger. So it's just a nice little list Tim and I put together on qualities that seem to fit into our group.
Absolutely. Because if it's not a good fit, then what's the point, right? So it's worth having that discussion, and I have discussions with everybody before they can, they get in, if you will. Mm-hmm. Just see if it's actually having deep conversations around consciousness or of, meaningful interest to you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Absolutely. Cool. Well, thanks, Tim.
Right on, my friend. Thank you so much.
We'll see you next week.
Okay, have a great weekend.